Hello, everybody. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. We had about 25 people sign up, and we have about a third of that here. So we're just going to give folks a couple more minutes to sign in, and then we'll get going.
While we're waiting in the chat, I just kind of threw up the project website address as a link for folks, and also an online survey that went live earlier, or maybe yesterday, for folks. And we'll talk more about that throughout the meeting, but those are there if you want to poke around while we're waiting.
Great, thank you, Nathan. Nathan, as I'm talking, can you, if I miss people admitting people, can you let them in as they come up? Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We'll have others joining in as the meeting is going. And that's totally okay. We have just a brief presentation to start off to give you a quick background of where we've been. But we want to focus majority of meeting tonight hearing from you about downtown Puyallup as well as the Meridian corridor. My name is Alex Dupy. I'm with MIG, and I'll be helping to facilitate this meeting tonight. We are the consultant team that was hired to assist the city in essentially getting to the point where we can develop a series of future projects, both in downtown and along the Meridian corridor. And so Nathan and others will be talking about some of the early work that we've been doing. But the focus tonight is really to hear from you about what you think are the key issues. And Meredith, you have some hands floating in the background behind you. Feel free, dogs, cats, kids. This is all Zoom. We know how this goes. So the point of tonight is just to hear from you at the early stage of this project for really, what are kind of the key issues that we should start to think about as we think about potentially a future project list, both for downtown Puyallup as well as the Meridian corridor south to the highway. So I think we have some fun exercises that we'll be doing. This is, as much as possible, kind of a traditional open house. We're just doing it on screen. And so we'll be doing a lot of things like getting around maps and putting sticky notes down, just like we used to when we used to get together. And hopefully we'll do again soon in the future in person. Before we jump in, Nathan, do you mind sharing your screen? And I just want to talk through Zoom a little bit for folks who are not maybe not as familiar with it. So we have about 25 people signed up tonight, which is a great group of folks to have this conversation. It's really hard, though, just like in an open house, to have everybody speak at once. And so what I'll ask of this is that we did mute everybody as you came in. That doesn't mean you have to stay mute for the entire time. What it helps us do is to make sure that everybody has a voice throughout the evening. So here's a couple ways we can do that. The first piece is there's a chat feature. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a little icon that has a little bubble, word bubble. Just click on that and drop a question or a comment or an issue in the chat. What we'll be doing is monitoring the chat, and we'll bring that into the conversation. So if you drop something in the chat, we may ask you a follow-up question. We may also just pull it into the conversation to make sure that we're addressing that. So the chat is a great way to do that. If you want to ask a question specifically, and we love if you want to bring your camera up and ask a question in person, just go ahead and raise your hand. And you can do that by that little reactions icon at the bottom. You'll see it's a smiley face with a little plus sign there. And so there's a few different buttons in that. So you can click that. You can raise your hand, and then that automatically takes you to the top of the queue. So on my screen, I'll see you right at the top with your hand raised, so that I can call you and it can bring you into the conversation. If somebody is saying something that you absolutely love or you really don't like, there's also some reactions within there that you can identify. Go ahead and do that too, and we can also talk about that. So as we're going through this meeting, there are a number of ways that we can you can be engaged, and we want to make sure that you have as much opportunity as possible. For folks, if you're on your phone, it's similar in terms of organization. There's 3 dots that say more. If you click in more, you'll see that opens up a screen that shows chat, raise hand, and then those icons for happy, sad, I love it, I don't love it. Same thing as you would on a screen. We are recording this meeting tonight. The reason why we record these is, 1, to make sure that we capture all of the information and the discussion, but also 2, not everybody is able to either be part of this meeting or the exact same meeting that we had at lunchtime today. So we want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to, if they want to see what was discussed, that we have the video, they can watch the video, and then they can also provide comments. One other piece, and I'll update this for everybody, is for closed captioning. If you do have trouble hearing, or you would like words on your screen that says what's happening, you can click that live transcript CC at the bottom, and then you can also enable subtitles for this. So with that, I just want to stop here for a second. Any questions about Zoom? We've all been doing this for about 3 years, whether it's at work or talking to grandkids or whatever, but I just want to make sure everybody is comfortable with Zoom, or if you have any questions about the setup tonight. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Scott for a quick introduction on the project, and then we'll do introductions to the team, and then we'll get into the evening. So Scott, off to you.
Thank you, Alex. So the city has been working to identify ways to enhance public amenities and the character of the downtown area. These would be things like public benches, garbage receptacles, public art, street lighting, flower boxes, and hanging planter baskets, in conjunction with the functionality of the multimodal transportation, which is bicycles, buses, trains, and pedestrians. We've also been looking at evaluating possible downtown trees and vegetation augmentation. So the city has been reviewing city-owned and operated infrastructure, water, sewer, and drainage, as well as private utility infrastructure, gas, power, and cable, for possible replacements due to conflicts and capacity enhancements. So as previously mentioned by Alex, the city has hired MIG to develop a prioritized list of recommendations to improve streetscapes in the downtown area. The city is seeking input now from residents, which will be taken into consideration for the development and prioritization of street amenities and infrastructure improvements. So that means this would actually result in designs and construction projects. So I'd like to introduce the MIG team: Nathan Pulaski, Claudia Sackett-Human, Alex Dupuy, and Justin Martin. And on the city side, we have Eric Johnson, who is the city PIO, Public Information Officer, Meredith Neal, our Economic Development Director, and myself, Scott Koch, the Project Manager. So MIG will now conduct a brief PowerPoint presentation detailing various aspects of the project, and after that, we'll take questions from the public. So at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to MIG.
Great, thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
So like Scott mentioned, we'll do a kind of quick overview on kind of what the project scope and study area is. We'll go through some of the work that we've done so far in the last several months, kind of where we're headed, and then we'll jump into our discussion. All right, so as Scott mentioned, we're really here to kind of help the city identify opportunities to invest in the downtown streetscape, infrastructure, as well as the Meridian corridor from Grayland Park all the way down to kind of just south of SR 512. The work that we're doing, we're really trying to see and ensure that kind of projects and priorities that come out of this align with past planning work. And we're going to be identifying and recommending a set of projects to move forward for that design and implementation, like Scott mentioned. So far, we've been doing data gathering, been meeting with city staff out in the field, kind of the city engineers, public works officials that maintain utilities. We've been doing kind of a variety of outreach, meeting with the technical advisory committee, as well as kind of focus group discussions and kind of stakeholders that I'll talk a little bit more about. From all of that, as well as this discussion and an online survey that's live right now, we'll be developing that kind of preliminary list of project recommendations and running that through an evaluation process that we develop with the advisory committee. and bringing those kind of preliminary recommendations back out to the public to get feedback on. And then a final kind of prioritized list would go to City Council. So from a project study area, there's kind of two main components to our study area. We've got that historic kind of downtown core from Stewart Avenue, sort of at the north down to Pioneer, and call it kind of 3rd West to 3rd East. So that's kind of our downtown area that we're looking at. And then we're also looking at the Meridian corridor, kind of from Grayland Park up at 5th Avenue, north, all the way down through the Fairgrounds, down to SR 512, and actually to kind of 14th, just the other side of SR 512. From a schedule standpoint, we got started in kind of late fall, and this primarily shows kind of the timeline and process for the community engagement portion of the project. We had a series of stakeholder meetings in November. We had our first meeting with the technical advisory folks. Just after that, we are here kind of late January, kind of meeting with the public, and we're going to be coming back out with the public with those preliminary recommendations in June. We're also going to be meeting with council kind of at key milestones to give City Council updates throughout the project. Our first meeting with council, we're looking for the first week in March is what we're hoping for. So kind of the work that we've done so far from a data gathering standpoint, I mentioned kind of reviewing city documents. Here's an image of the downtown neighborhood plan. That's one chapter of the city's comprehensive plan. We went through, I want to say 12 or 15 different documents and really tried to grab information that was relevant to our study area and kind of the purpose of this project. And we've gone through and actually documents that we produced as from the document review, as well as the site walks with meetings. Those memorandums are posted on the city's project website. So if people want to look into more detail, kind of some of our findings, some of the things we're looking at, please kind of check out the project website. But we've been on site with city staff looking at kind of pavement conditions. We've talked about and looked at kind of long-term utility needs. We've been walked the project areas with city's traffic engineer, kind of observing, how accessible sidewalks are or are not. What are the impacts kind of with traffic signals crossing the streets. We've also done a fairly high level kind of review of the streetscape environment, kind of cataloging where there are kind of benches and other street amenities. An arborist conducted a high level tree assessment of the existing street trees. And kind of taking a look at kind of opportunities to improve safety and potentially reduce noise at railroad crossings long term. And then stakeholder meetings, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So some of the key themes from city documents, really kind of focused on, downtown streets should cater to people walking, encourage multimodal transportation options, kind of high quality, attractive streetscape environments that sort of, support local businesses, have nice tree canopy, variety of planting, ideally much less impact on the existing pavement and infrastructure than you see out there today. We also want to make sure that long-term there is infrastructure in place to support future development and needs. So from a stakeholder standpoint, we had 7 separate meetings. We met with the Main Street Association, business and property owners. We had an in-person meeting at the Senior Center, which was well attended. We met with several folks from the development community, sort of walking and biking focus group, Chamber of Commerce, and staff from the Fairgrounds. And we're also going to be kind of pulling in the Arts Commission and the kind of arts nonprofit that kind of manages some of the art out on the streets, kind of as we get into identifying project recommendations. Some of the key findings from these, downtown hosts a lot of events, but it's not particularly pedestrian friendly with some of the kind of tripping hazards and other conditions of the sidewalk, kind of the widths of sidewalks. There's a desire from businesses to kind of enhance the curb appeal of downtown streets. We talked a lot about parking, on-street parking, and kind of time restrictions that vary by block face that you're on from one street to the other, as well as kind of the challenge of finding off-street parking, which there are several larger lots downtown. Talked about kind of the need for wayfinding signage. Residents and people that come downtown frequently know their way around. There's also a lot of people that don't come downtown and kind of struggle to kind of find their destinations, and kind of there's a opportunity to improve some of that wayfinding. Speed of traffic along Meridian and kind of how that impacts people crossing the street on foot and in cars. Also, more places to stop and rest. How can street enhancements lead to that future development? So one of the things we heard from downtown business owners along Stewart Avenue is that north of the railroad tracks feels a bit disconnected from downtown. And so are there opportunities to, as we think of making changes to the kind of infrastructure to kind of lessen that disconnect? And then lighting and visibility concerns, also in a few of the alleys that do have business access, including like the children's theater. And then there's, there are no bike lanes and very few bike racks. So that's sort of the kind of quick summary of kind of what we've done so far. We're going to pause there and see if there are any questions from folks. And as Alex mentioned, kind of feel free to raise your hand or type in the chat box.
And also just many of those documents, we're still summarizing the final stakeholder notes, but many of those documents that Nathan referenced are available on the project website. Justin, thanks for posting that again within the chat. And so the project website is there as essentially a resource for you. So if you're interested in any of these pieces, certainly feel free to go there and download any of this stuff, or also there's contact information for the project as well too. But with that, any questions from the information that Nathan or Scott presented? David, you had a question. Oh, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Are there any proposals that have been put forth so far for the street trees?
No proposals have been put forth, but it has been identified by numerous kind of stakeholders, kind of city staff and kind of public works officials who have to manage the sidewalks. It is an ongoing challenge. They, basically before every downtown event, they go out there and kind of grind sidewalks and make sure tripping hazards are kept to a minimum. And there's kind of that ongoing maintenance cost. And so we've heard it from staff and we've heard it from the community. But
yeah,
there's no kind of set plan, but it's a high priority from the things we've heard.
probably maybe putting the wrong kind of tree in the wrong place rather than the right kind of tree in the right place. I guess my comment would be that it seems to me trees in the landscape give a better kind of ambiance than trees in pots.
Thank you, David.
Which we have now along the parking lot across from the post office.
Yeah. Yep.
But the right kind of tree.
That's a great point. Thank you, David. Other comments or questions? And David, we're going to get into that in just a little bit too on some of the more in-depth questions.
Just real quick to segue on to Nathan's comments. So one of the things that we have done in this project is we went out and we inventoried all of the trees, and we gave them some prioritization of if they had any utility conflicts, overhead utility conflicts, or sidewalk conflicts. And we also catalog the species of specific trees. So we'll be able to make recommendations about which locations and which specific trees might be prioritized for replacement.
Thank you.
You bet.
Any other questions or anything pique your interest as Nathan was stepping through it? All right, well, let's move on just a bit. We have plenty of time to talk more. So we are going to do a couple different exercises. We're going to do a little bit of polling just to get some high level ideas out there. And so we want to do a little bit of this, and then we want to get into a map exercise shortly thereafter. So I'm going to launch a few polls, and with all of these polls, they're just kind of simple questions. There's no right or wrong answer. And so we want to just kind of get a sense of where you're at on a few different issues. All right, so let me launch this first one. But before we get into the issues, we want to just have a little bit of a warm-up poll. So what are your favorite things to do at the State Fair? go ahead and pick 2 or 3 or 1. Why don't you tell us what you think about the State Fair and what you like to do there? And we'll leave these open for maybe 45 seconds or a minute or so, just to give everybody time to be able to provide their input. All right, we got about 3 or 4 more people that are still going to vote. All right, 10 more seconds. All right, I'm going to end the poll. And then what I'll do for each of these, we have 2 more of these, promise, not related to the fair. I'm going to go ahead and share that with us so we can see where people are. So what we like to do at the fair, most people in this group just like to walk around and see the sites, which is great. You know, there's so much stuff happening there. This is actually a really interesting response for many of you, because we're going to be talking a lot about walking along the Meridian corridor and in downtown. We asked the same question. We had the exact same meeting at noon today, and I'll say you're a healthier group. There were fewer of you who actually would eat a 3-foot-long corn dog. So hats off to you. Your heart appreciates you for not doing that, but they are very delicious. So anyways, just a little bit of aside. All right, so let's get into the meat of it. So the first thing we want to talk about are some of the issues facing downtown today. And David, I think some of this is germane to your question or comment earlier. You know, what are some of the biggest things facing downtown in the Meridian corridor? Sidewalk obstructions, whether that's routes or other things, you know, that make the sidewalks hard to use, traffic jams after trains, unsafe crosswalks, wait time at traffic signals, and that could be for pedestrians, bikes, or it could be vehicles as well. Inadequate bike amenities. That was something we heard a lot through some of the early stakeholder interviews we did. And then not enough bus shelters. So we're going to leave those up there. And I'm going to launch another poll. And so these polling questions are the same questions as we have with those pictures. And then also, if there's something in there that doesn't really fit, just go ahead and put that in other, and then we'll come back to that. So go ahead and pick about 3 if you want, up to 3. Which are the biggest issues facing downtown, design issues facing downtown today? All right, some results coming in. All right, just about 10 more seconds. I think most people have voted. There we go. All right, 5 more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close out the poll. Share some results. All right, so when we look at major issues within downtown, a lot of things are coming to the top. Sidewalk obstructions, whether that's routes or other things. We'll want to dig into that a little bit in just a bit, but also wait time at traffic signals. And so I'm curious, for people that voted for that, what, from a wait time standpoint, are you referring to it as a pedestrian, as a motorist, as a cyclist? Help us understand what those wait times look like, or how you experience them. David?
This has to do as a motorist. Find that some traffic lights that are cross streets to Meridian are green long enough for 2 cars to pass, and then they turn yellow again. So I'm not sure about how the lights are coordinated exactly. Right. You know, probably if more of them were computerized or whatever, or made to recognize the traffic at hand, we'd have a little less of that.
Great, thank you. And that we heard that over and over in the first meeting too. And it's not, from my understanding, it's not so much if you're on Meridian, it's really those east-west streets that poses that problem. And then Rhonda, you had for you, it's a pedestrian. And so I'm assuming if you're trying to get the walk, you have to push the button. You know, if it's only allowing 2 cars through, you have to wait a long time and then you rush across the street. Rhonda, is that fair? Is that fair? Do you want to add to that?
And as we've walked the streets, and we've been down several times, is we find that even when the light turns green for cars, if you haven't hit the button, you don't get the walk signal.
Yeah.
Rhonda, yes, and I hope no one turns on red. Yes. nothing like being in the middle of a street and having to dodge a car. So we'll come back to this as we get into this, but this is really interesting information. All right, next one. All right. So for this, so we have our issues. We've identified some of those, and we'll come back to some of the others. What are some ways downtown can be improved? Some of these examples are more seating, consistent branding and signage, planting strips with native plants. David, you were talking about plants in pots or trees in pots, you know, as opposed to in the ground. Traffic calming. Rhonda, maybe getting to some of your earlier comment. More parklets and bike lanes. And when I wanted to define parklet just a bit. So a parklet is essentially using the parking space in front of a business for seating. And so we've seen a lot of that, particularly in COVID, when businesses had to close their internal space. And so a lot of businesses were using that parking space in the front for additional seating. The city had a great program actually of designing their own temporary parklets, and that's an example of one on the front. And so that parklet is really just an extension of that business, using that parking for something slightly different than it was initially designed for, but in a way that supports the business. All right, so let's launch a poll. All right, so opportunities. So maybe pick up to 3. What ways do you think downtown can be improved? All right, just a few more votes. Give it about another 15 or 20 seconds or so.
And Alex, while we're waiting for those to come in, Rhonda did have another comment about bike lanes and kind of the concerns with conflicts between people walking and biking.
Walkers have to move to get out of the way of bikes. Thank you, Rhonda. All right, about 5 more seconds. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. Share the results. Okay, so this one's interesting. This one's a little bit more balanced than what we saw from an issue standpoint. Lots of ways we can improve downtown. Consistent branding and signage, throughout downtown, how to get around in and about the area. Next was traffic calming. I think in line with some of what we heard from what Rhonda was saying and others for pedestrian, safety, but also probably bicycling safety. I want to ask about other. So 4 people voted for other, and I'm wondering if you would share either in the chat or just by jumping in the conversation of what else you think, what are the ways you think downtown can be improved? Anybody? David, I'll get to you, but let's see if there's anybody else. Anybody else besides from David? David, you're my A student tonight, so I appreciate that. Anybody else want to share what their others are? Clean sidewalks. Thank you, Rhonda. All right, David, what do you got?
I'm wondering, as someone who bicycles infrequently in the summertime, it's always scary to be on a main street in the first place. And if you create bike lanes, as in Seattle, it's disruptive to vehicular traffic because it uses up valuable space. I've always wondered why we don't have bike routes that aren't on main thoroughfares. Many times you could get to where you're going, as we do when we bike, by using side streets instead. And as bike routes rather than bike lanes being not on the thoroughfare.
So David, if I'm hearing you right, it's the bike lanes really focusing on where they're located.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then Hannah, you had your hand up, and then Larry, I want you to bring your comment in just a second, but Hannah, you had your hand raised.
So I voted other, and the reason for that is because I think that perhaps downtown could be more attractive. So aside from the other options here, if there was more of a dynamic such as University Village, where that it is a closed shopping environment. And when the survey went out about a year ago, or maybe it was the beginning or middle of 2020 around Puyallup, and it was asking about the police and other things, just broadly about Puyallup, it asked what could it do better, or what could it do different? And at that point, I put in there my comments about Puyallup and downtown in general. And it seems to me, even if downtown, if there were certain pieces of it which were not even open to driving, and were just simply closed off, right? So even around the post office and Anthem Coffee and things of that nature, such that it were just simply not open to motorists, but were simply just walking, and certain business owners were brought in. That to me has never even been presented as an option. And so that's why I selected other.
Great, thank you, Hannah, I appreciate that. Larry, I want to get to your comment. You had a question about, are we only planning for people who live downtown, and are we excluding people who have to drive downtown for events? The answer is no. Part of this is to look at the system holistically, certainly for vehicles, but also for bicycles, pedestrians, transit riders, and others, people of all abilities to be able to use the streets. So definitely not to exclude cars, although Hannah, you had a comment that maybe we should in some areas, but the goal is to make downtown attractive and safe, but also accessible for people living throughout the city. And I wanted to mention too, and I forgot to mention this early on, as you have a comment, City Council is very interested in knowing whether you're inside the city or outside the city. So if you wouldn't mind with your comment, just say what neighborhood you live in or around. You don't have to give your address, we're not asking for that, but either neighborhood or area of the city you live in. And if you are a part of this meeting and you're not a resident, that is totally okay. We want to hear from you as well. City Council is just curious, they want to make sure they know where the comments are coming from. A couple of pieces. So Larry, yes, we are looking at being able to provide a multimodal system for all users. Art, you had a comment, visual appeal, also very important. And I'm gonna stop sharing here just for a second. And then Carol, it sounds like you're supporting what David was saying about bike routes being maybe a few blocks away from Main Street. So if I'm understanding it correctly and what David was saying, bike routes are great. Maybe let's just find the right place for them throughout the network. All right. So that was fun. So we got some good information. Great that people are using the chats. Let's change gear just a little bit and let's start getting into a few more details. Oh, and then, sorry, thank you for that. We will talk about the survey as well later on. We'll make sure we post that again. We don't want to lose that, but I do want to get into this next piece. So as Claudia is sharing her screen, I just want to explain what's gonna come up on the screen. So we met with residents and businesses just like this at noon today, and we started to develop essentially a map of key issues and opportunities and potential projects or things that we want to move forward based on your comments. And so what you see here is you see a number of different essentially electronic sticky notes of the comments that were brought in through the chat or that were incorporated through the conversation. And so what we're going to do tonight is we're going to build on what happened at noon today. So I wouldn't worry about all of these little sticky notes. Think of this as an open house where you've come in, you've come to a map, and there's a bunch of sticky notes on it from people from before you. We're going to keep building on that. We're going to keep building on that kind of open house concept. So also what we're going to do here is, because this is we have downtown as a core area. We also have the Meridian, you know, kind of finger coming down to the south. We're going to break it up into a few different spots just to be able to focus on these key areas. So with that, going back to our polling, we're looking at issues and opportunities. Are there specific areas or locations in downtown that you would really want to focus on? And if you did, what would be those things you'd want to focus on in that location? And again, feel free to use the chat or raise your hand or whatever you're most comfortable with. And while we're waiting, Carol, you live in South Hill. Thank you. You enjoy walking and biking and riding to downtown Puyallup, though you also drive. Perfectly acceptable. I drove there last time. I drove there too. Lauren, you had a comment. Downtown is vibrant. There's a vibrant place to live, and it's evident by the city's investment in new multi-housing development. I'm not sure if it is exclusive to just restaurants. I live in condos, and condos above Anthem as well. Thank you, Lauren. I wanted to clarify. You're not sure if it is exclusive to just restaurants. What did you? Can you clarify that statement a little bit?
Yeah, I was responding to Larry's comment.
Oh, gotcha.
But thank you.
So if we were to focus downtown, what would be the block or the intersection that you'd want to talk about first? Art, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I actually think that if we were really trying to take a look holistically at the downtown, is that what we've got diagrammed out is not truly the entire downtown.
Okay.
And as we are looking to add more housing in all this area, I think to the west it should be the 5th Street. To the east it should be 4th, and it should go down to the Fairgrounds instead. So we look at that whole corridor as being what we classify for Puyallup as downtown.
So
and that way, yeah, go ahead.
No, that's fine. So you would essentially take that, make it a big rectangle all the way down and make it a wider rectangle.
I would make it right. Because eventually that's what, we want businesses, we want people to be able to be pedestrians and walk through all those areas and have all the activities that they need right there. And right now we're limiting to such a small area, but yet we have so much activity going on down the street and farther out than what is being proposed in this downtown corridor.
That's a great comment. Thank you. And one thing is interesting that when we were looking at downtown and the Meridian corridor, just how close residential, single family residential is to downtown. You have your core, kind of your corridor and your kind of old town Main Street, but it becomes residential very quickly, and the streets change very quickly. So I appreciate that comment about broadening this. Lauren, you had your hand up.
I didn't mean to do that. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Did you have a comment or anything you want to add to this?
Not at this point, but thank you again.
Okay. All right. So broadening the project area. So Art, I want to hold you to that here in just a second, because we're going to talk about some of those areas just south of kind of that core location that we identified. Going back to those core areas, what are some key things or focus areas we'd like to focus on? And thinking back to the issues, sidewalk issues, bike lanes, street trees, branding. Those were other pieces that came up as a part of our polling. Are those important to this core downtown? Then Rhonda, you had a comment about you'd love to see the iconic old post office spruced up. So becoming more of a kind of a place, something identifiable, it sounds like. A landmark, thank you, perfect. Thank you for helping me with my words. It's getting late, it's dinner time. So one thing we heard this morning was partly about those intersections. And Rhonda, going back to some of your other comments as well, like if you had to pick a location or an intersection, you know, what are the most challenging intersections in the downtown area now? And we could broaden that to as a pedestrian, as a motorist. Are there specific things, like if you were to do a list of 1 to 5 that you would put number 1 on your list of things to address, where would that be?
Or if it was getting to downtown and there's a street that is challenging to cross, like 3rd East.
Thank you, Nathan. So even broadening that question a little bit. So Rhonda, Pioneer and Meridian walking. And then the area around the train station seems ripe for improvement and beautification. What's the impediment of having a pedestrian crossing within the station? I'm seeing some votes for Pioneer and Meridian. So we're going to talk about Meridian all the way down to the freeway. What about Meridian and downtown? Are there specific issues here? And then David, I want to get to your comment earlier about crossing. So Pioneer west of Meridian. That sounds like that's a hot spot for issues, that corridor.
And the city has tried, they have installed kind of flashing beacons to kind of at crosswalks on 2nd and 3rd, I believe. Is it those intersections or those and others?
As people are thinking about that, David, getting back to your comment, what's the impediment of having a pedestrian crossing within the station? When you say that, are you asking about crossing the rail tracks within the station to the other side to Stewart, or is that, what are your thoughts there?
I was thinking of an elevated crossing.
So something to get over the tracks and get to the other side.
It seems crazy that since you're taking a train on one side of the tracks to get to work and then taking a train on the other track to return, and there's no short way to get back to where the person's car might be or whatever. Most places that I've been in Japan a lot, and there, all stations have track crossings, which doesn't seem to be a huge construction project.
What about other crossings? So there's crossings of the tracks. What about the north part of downtown and the south part of downtown? Like if we look at the tracks more broadly as a dividing line, are there specific places that if you were going across that you would find dangerous, or that you would want to take a look at to make it, essentially make it one downtown as a one that's instead of one that's bifurcated by the rail line?
To understand the question.
Sorry, I was rambling a little bit. So we have a rail line that goes right through, and what we've heard is that that's definitely a pedestrian barrier. Those intersections, there are roads that cross the rail line, but from what we've heard is that pedestrians don't feel safe walking across those. Do you think those are important issues to think about for projects? Are there different ways should we think about different ways to be able to make it more attractive or safe or feel more comfortable for folks crossing that? Do you think it's an issue?
And Rhonda mentioned, the distance between them makes them challenging.
Yeah.
Is it not, do people feel it's not safe to walk across the tracks?
I think that's a question to the group. It was raised this morning or this afternoon during our first meeting where people felt uncomfortable. And so I'm doing an impromptu poll of this group to see if they feel that way as well.
And it may be a perception. I don't know if it's the speed that some of the trains come through town. Maybe it's not crossing when the trains aren't there, but it's kind of the seeing that and the discomfort, but kind of open to individuals' kind of interpretations and feelings on that.
All right, Carol had a comment. I find some of the downtown intersections have plants nearby with short line of sight for cars and pedestrians. So working on those line of sight issues to where pedestrians aren't hidden either for safety for themselves or for cars. So let's move on just a little bit. I want to make sure we can cover some of these other pieces. We can come back to this at the end, but I want to respect your time, but also make sure we can talk about the entire corridor. Claudia, you want to jump to the next?
And Lauren, thank you for adding the kind of some details on the kind of where crossing Pioneer is uncomfortable or kind of has some challenges at 2nd and 3rd. And then also Giorgio's and the Shell station down on Meridian, just south of our map. So right there on our map.
So let's talk about this. This is a transition area. So this is down near City Hall and the park, just kind of the southern part of that core downtown that we identified. Similar questions. The street environment starts to change a little bit as you come out of this area. Street trees are a little bit different. The roads are a little bit different. What are some good things or things you'd want to change within this area? Like, again, if you were to think about a project, what would you want to see happen in this location? Or if you've crossed the street recently, how did that feel? As we're thinking about that, Lauren had a comment about that street parking can also impede the line of sight onto Meridian from cross streets. So where that parking is located on the street to make sure that maybe it's not right at the intersection. Rhonda, you had a comment, the flasher's been taken out. And is that where that red star is, Nathan? The flashers?
Yeah, I think there's an in-ground pavement lights that are maybe not working or functioning, and they've used a flag to cross at City Hall and the park.
And so, Rhonda, is the flag effective for you, or is that something you'd want to see worked on? All right. We heard a lot about that. Go as fast as you can across Meridian. So.
And back to the comments about, parked cars kind of blocking line of sight for people. We did hear that at the Giorgio's intersection with that kind of flashing beacon that's on the north side of the 4th Avenue intersection, is that it's really hard to see or be seen when you're trying to cross Meridian.
So a couple of comments. Hannah, you had a comment about this is, it's unnerving as a driver too. If people are coming out where you can't see them. So line of sight issues, it sounds like that's what you're talking about. And then David, you had another comment. I've been in cities where pedestrian crossings involve not yellow flashing lights, but an actual red light that effectively stops traffic during pedestrian use. Yeah, certainly different levels of pedestrian crossings for sure. And so, David, are you saying that this is an area that you might want to see a higher level of pedestrian protection or pedestrian crossing?
I think where traffic starts speeding up past City Hall, going south of City Hall, as they are headed for the freeway or wherever, I think you mentioned it, the roadway has a more open appearance, mm-hmm. and probably a little more reluctance to slow down. And I've been in places where they use when you push the button, as we push the button for a yellow flashing lights, the traffic actually gets a red traffic light that lasts for a number of seconds, 45 seconds or however long. It is a reasonable time for someone to get across the street and then goes back. And in places where traffic is accelerating or not wanting to slow down or stop, maybe some more severe method of getting drivers' attention would be called for.
Thank you, David. So a lot of these comments actually go straight back to some of our issues that we talked about in the poll about traffic calming. And so whether that's speed or width of streets or how the street is designed, a lot of these comments are starting to, you know, kind of get back to that feeling of safety and comfort. And Lauren, I believe is your question, or Hannah, actually, you had your hand up as well too. The idea of just slowing down, maybe it irritates drivers, but you know, you feel safer, a pedestrian feels safer. Hannah, what other comments did you have?
Oh, just that the light turns green, and so you're accelerating. And of course, that crosswalk is right, you know, is fairly close to the traffic signal as well. So as you're accelerating, I've had it such that then when the light, when there was a flasher light, someone is actually, it's happened to me a couple of times where they've actually already entered the crosswalk there. So then I've had to slam on my brake. Well, as a motorist, you slam on your brake because particularly at dusk or at night, you slam on your brake, the person behind you, if they're not traveling a safe enough distance, then you're going to end up with a car accident as well. So it's escalated beyond unnerving. It really does become a point of safety. So to some of the other, you know, comments as well, you really are getting into the point, moving a little bit beyond the sort of core of what people think of downtown and into the accelerating, the point of accelerating where the speeds do increase.
Yeah, Hannah, that's a great segue into our next segment, because what we're hearing is that downtown, there are definitely, you know, things to work on, but as you're moving out of downtown, the street environment changes a bit, and there was a lot of conversation earlier in the chat about, you know, places where you're uncomfortable, you know, Pioneer and Meridian, other spaces, and that, you know, at least kind of what we've seen, that has a lot to do with speed, and speed is often a lot about design. So Claudia, if you could jump to the next one, and again, you know, these are, we're collecting all of the chats, so everything that you put in the chat becomes part of our project. And so we are not, all of this information goes onto the mural, but we also are having a record. So this is great information, both what you're typing out, what you're saying, what we're getting on the mural. This is super helpful as we think forward into a series of projects.
And
So
Alex,
Hannah,
one comment that Lauren had typed, you know, would be interested in whether or not speed bumps would ever be considered in the downtown core, especially on Pioneer outside Anthem and Activity Center. So we did talk to city kind of traffic engineering staff about, you know, potentially the opportunity for raised crosswalks like on Meridian. And so we'll continue that conversation and see if there are appropriate places as we look at, you know, opportunities to enhance and improve crosswalks to make them safer, if, you know, a raised crosswalk is something that could be doable.
So Lauren, your comment, it's even worse during farmers market, concerts in the park, and other things. So help me understand that. So if are people trying to they're coming into the city and just trying to get to as quickly as they can to spaces, or is it because there's more people on the street and there's greater conflict? You know, what makes that soup of different things happening? What makes that worse?
So in my perspective and experience, I would say it's the latter, right? So there's an influx of folks, pedestrians on sidewalks, crossings, you know, folks coming through downtown in their vehicles, you know, are impatient. They're just trying to get to where they need to go. Increased vehicles, you know, in the utilizing street parking and elsewhere, you know, that also decreases line of sight, combined with increased pedestrian activity. You know, it becomes a bit more intense, to Hannah's original point, which I agree with.
Yeah, so you're mixing a lot more activity on the street with high speeds, essentially, and so that's dangerous. You know, that can become challenging.
Well, or it's high speed, and also many times folks aren't paying attention when they're driving, right? So you have people that are I mean, certainly they're using the crosswalks, but then you have folks that are darting through, or, you know, jaywalking, you could say. So, you know, it just, it gets a little, folks really have to be observant. And I think that for both motorists, drivers, and pedestrians, it does become a bit more challenging during those times.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Less room for error.
Less room for error. Let's let's drop down to the fairgrounds. So, you know, kind of with that in mind, obviously the fairgrounds are a really big part of you know, this party Puyallup. There's a lot of stuff happening, not just during the state fair, but, you know, other events throughout the year at this location. And so kind of building on that idea of, or the kind of theme that we've heard about speed and design and traffic calming. This is a different environment than what we've seen, you know, on Meridian, for example, downtown. And so I want to ask two questions about that. One is about, as a pedestrian, like who on the call, or who do you know, walks from downtown to the fairgrounds? And, you know, if they did, what would their experience be? But also as a motorist, you know, as I drive through this area, I'm inclined to start to go faster because I know I'm going to get on the freeway, you know. And so I'm curious, you know, how do you feel as a pedestrian, or as a cyclist, or as a motorist in this area? Because it's a much different environment than the areas we were just talking about. Art, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it depends on the time of year, because it's pretty well controlled when there are activities at the fairgrounds going on to control the speeds, to where the people are accessing the cross streets. Once you get away from Meridian, you have a little more difficulty, because like's happening on Meridian, when people are coming into town for those kind of things, all the parking spots are being grabbed up and people are darting in and out of cars. So your line of sights are a lot worse. During non-fair activities, then there's not as much pedestrian traffic on that area. So as I've walked that area, sometimes, you know, it's just easier. There's sidewalks, there's the amenities to handle that. Yes, during rush hour, you don't have to worry about traffic calming. It's already down to dead slow anyway. But at night or early in the morning, when it's more open, then as a walker, you have to be a little more diligent before you cross any street out in Puyallup.
So if I'm hearing that correctly, so part of it is, you know, if there's no events, you know, there's just fewer pedestrians, so fewer conflicts, but it's really that time of day. But also if there are events, it's more managed, and there are a ton of people. So are you more careful as you drive or walk through that with that? Is that a fair?
Yes.
Thank you. Other suggestions or comments in this area? I'm gonna pose a question to you. Who thinks, or Hannah, you had your hand up.
So I would say that the walking, just so if you park in one of the lots, and I'm really bad with directions, but the Starbucks, so if you're walking to the admin building, the timing of that. So there's very little time to actually cross the street. Similarly, if you're driving and you're trying to the turn lane, there is poor synchronization from my perspective, from the turn signal, the turn lane, or even walking, crossing the street. The timing of that is really, there's limited time, and there's also poor synchronization from a pedestrian for the crosswalk, as well as the traffic that is on Meridian, you know, going both, what would that be, north and south? Great, thank you. And Lauren added in the chat, who apparently is a walking expert between the fair, who walked every day. That's great information, you know, how you've walked through that, but also, you know, speed of motorists is it's often over the limit, even during fair times, when you have a lot of pedestrians and motorists on the street. David, visual perception, a more open environment, gas station, strip mall. Again, you know, it is a different environment in this area. And I'm actually curious, you know, if you were from out of town and you visited the fair, you visited this area, would you even know that downtown Puyallup exists if you didn't, you know, come from the north, or you didn't drive up? Because if you look at it, this area, you know, what's the environment like? What is it? How would people know about the great stuff in downtown Puyallup if you're in this area? Rhonda, no, you don't think so?
Well, Rhonda, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Why haven't you gone downtown? Most people in King County have no idea that Puyallup exists. Art, you had a comment.
Yeah, I live on the South Hill too, but I do go downtown. Basically, there's a lot of the boutique type shops or down to meet friends. But for people that I know that come down from other areas, they go to the fair, they get right back on the freeway and leave. There's nothing there to direct them to where the downtown is and what's available down there. The city doesn't do a very good job of advertising it out during the fair days to come down to other areas within the city of Puyallup itself.
Yeah, and I'm noticing that the comments are similar, or kind of similar to that, where, you know, they're people just don't know that it exists. You come here for a specific reason, then you leave for that. Art, did you have another comment?
Nope.
All right, no problem. David, you had a comment. Redevelopment with mixed commercial, residential, and multi-story structures would give an impression of being downtown instead of the suburbs. I think that, you know, that's an interesting comment, David, in comparison to an earlier comment about downtown as a much larger rectangle, as opposed to just, you know, the corridor that we have defined on this map. You know, thinking more broadly about where that would be. And David, if I'm responding to your question correctly, having more of that development within this area would make it feel a little bit more urban, if you will, or more tied with what's happening downtown. Is that fair?
Yes.
All right. Well, we're just at about 7:05. I wanted to, one, respect your time for this, but I also wanted to make sure that we have, you know, as much information as you're willing to give in this area. Are there other questions, comments, concerns? And we can move back on the other maps if you wanted to add. Hannah, a better mix of retailers. Thank you. Is there anything else you would want to add to any of these maps or comments in general? And if not, that's okay. We can, but we do want to save a little bit of time for next steps for this. Larry, you had a comment. Decades ago, merchants suggested signage at the fair advertising events downtown and similar signs downtown advising residents of events happening. So yeah, that crossover with knowledge about what's happening in both areas and supporting those local businesses, and Hannah having a better mix of retailers through that area. So thinking of this as more symbiotic between the two spaces. Other issues or opportunities or questions? All right, sorry, a bunch of them come in. Let me take a quick look. Most of your stars are placed on the south or west side of town. Will there be any considerations for the north or east section of town? There are large apartment housing developments along the bike trails, but there is such a disconnect between connecting the trailheads on the east and north sides of downtown. Viable alternative routes for this area and the highway entrance. I'd like to see the conversation grow beyond just Meridian. Thank you for that, Kenya. In this project, we're focused generally within this area, but there has definitely been conversation about how we connect the existing bike and multimodal or multi-use facilities to downtown as a part of that, because there really isn't any of that downtown today. So point well taken on thinking about what happens here and how we connect that more regionally. Rhonda, lots of rain here. Love awnings on storefronts. Yes, we don't all. Can we use umbrellas? I can never remember. So lots of more awnings. And a couple others. There's been a very well presentation done on conversation on management, ensuring everyone has a chance to share thoughts. Oh, thank you, Lauren. That's for us. Appreciate that. So let's move in then. Oh, David, where are we going to get art in this conversation? So David, to your points, we have not talked about art tonight, but we talked a lot about art at the 12 o'clock meeting. We had a couple representatives who called in from the Arts Commission and Downtown Arts Groups. But is there something you'd like to add about art here today that you want to make sure is here in this And there are art stickies on there. I guarantee there are art stickies on these sheets.
They're just a little small for me to see, but I just wanted to point out that we have a nonprofit Arts Downtown group, which you've heard about, that regularly proposes artworks for city approval. The organization goes through a program of artist notification, art selection, and public input prior to submitting works to the city for consideration. And because it's an independent organization, can operate the arts maintenance program that can respond very quickly in the event that maintenance is needed. So got a 27-year-long history of working with the city and wanted to bring that forward. I guess others have done that first.
No, that's great, David, and thank you for bringing that up. Yes, art was a very big part of the conversation during our 12 o'clock call. And so one, I want to assure you that there is a bunch of stuff about art in here, both with the commission as well as the Downtown Arts Group. And so, you know, using that essentially really as a way to kind of define place and also actually to slow traffic in some ways. You know, could you use that as a way, art as a way of wayfinding, for example? Because that was also another issue that was been brought up by both this group and the group at 12 o'clock. Let's just pause for a second, and it's about 10 after, so I want to make sure we can get out of here and get some dinner. Nathan, do you want to talk about next steps briefly on this, and then we'll talk about the mural and kind of how this all comes together?
Yeah, sure. So we have the online survey that we mentioned earlier is live right now. It's going to be open for 3 weeks. I'm going to copy that web address into the chat so everyone can see that again and access it. We're going to be taking that information and kind of adding that to the kind of information that we've gathered from our kind of focus group stakeholder discussions. And we're going to be taking all of this information to start to identify some kind of emerging opportunities and projects. Our next meeting with the technical advisory team is to talk about the process for kind of prioritizing and or identifying priorities amongst the projects that have been identified. And then we'll be coming back out to the public in likely June with sort of a preliminary list of project recommendations and some kind of priorities around those based on our discussions with the city staff and kind of the technical advisory team.
And so with that, and with the mural, what we did is, you saw a lot of the input coming in. So how we've, all of the information gathered during this meeting and the meeting at 12 o'clock, that's within the mural. We're going to go back through the chats and also the recordings to make sure we've captured all of that. And then ultimately that will become a product of this discussion. So we're saving the polling, all the chats, all of this discussion to make sure that we have a solid base of knowledge to start to develop that potential project list that Nathan was talking about. We will be hopefully in person in June. It's hard to say, we might be doing this again, but it would be great to meet with you in person around a table and just talk about this. But I do want to stress, and I'm going to share my screen here real quick. Let me turn off. Move the chat.
Alex, and we have a question in the chat too about the overall project goals, which I don't know if we want to address or.
Let's see. Yeah. So Hannah, you had a question about for the project goals, what are the primary, secondary, tertiary? Is a primary goal from a business perspective to attract and enhance business development, or is the focus primarily residential and nature related to civic, beauty, and safety? Nathan, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think what we're looking for, what are kind of strategic opportunities for the city to invest in, whether it be infrastructure that supports future development, whether it be kind of enhanced kind of sidewalk and appearance that support businesses, or making the streets and sidewalks safer for people. So it's sort of a very broad goal, and ultimately what we're trying to do is kind of figure out what community priorities and city priorities there are from a kind of planning and infrastructure need, and help the city move those forward. Our sort of final deliverable with this project is sort of developing scoping reports. So we'll be developing a packet for sort of the proposed sets of projects that the city can use forward to move beyond sort of the initial planning conversation into future design and ideally kind of built infrastructure projects.
Thanks, Nathan. And with those goals, a lot of the goals have already been identified through your downtown plan and through the comprehensive plan. So in a lot of ways, what we're talking about tonight is actual implementation of those things that have already been adopted through your comprehensive plan and your downtown planning. So we're trying to put the pieces together to be able to implement a lot of those goals. So before I leave you tonight, I wanted to just share this survey because we covered a lot of the stuff that's in the survey, but this is one that I think will be fun for you. And can everybody see that? See the survey there? So this survey asks similar questions to what we talked about tonight, but goes into more depth. And so I think from a timing standpoint, if you were to start from beginning to end, you could breeze through this in probably 5 to 7 minutes. If you really wanted to get into it, you could spend as much time on it as you want. This is a slightly different survey than you've probably taken in the past. And I'm just going to click through the first pieces. It's map-based in many ways. And so some of the things that we ask, just are essentially, you can zoom in, you can see I was showing this at 12, where do you live? You can actually pull pins and start to place pins on the map in different places for key issues. And as you get into the map, we're going to ask you about key intersections, opportunities and constraints, things you'd like to see. So some of the questions we talk about here, but it goes into more depth. We also ask a lot about routing. Like, how do you walk around downtown? How do you drive? Where do you take the bus or transit? Or David, to your point, how do you get to the train station? If you're going, going one way or the other. So I encourage you to take this because I think, one, it's fun. You can do it on a laptop, a tablet. You can do it on your computer, your phone. But it's a great way to kind of think about downtown and the Meridian corridor at a granular level. Also, I'll mention too is that we have, the general project area, but I forget who made that comment, but if you want to make comments outside of that project area, you can do that as well too. So don't feel limited by just this red dot. If you wanted to provide information here, you could provide that out further out as well too. So this is just kind of where we're looking, but it doesn't mean that you can't help us understand some of these broader areas.
And Alex, I kind of would add, we have talked in those kind of stakeholder and focus group meetings about the boundaries being a little bit loose. The city sort of needed to define the boundaries to kind of give us a starting point, but recognize that, some of the streets, when you look at the maps, stick out a little bit farther than others. And, I think as we look at things, holistically, like Alex has mentioned, what are the kind of smart investments and opportunities to improve access and the kind of street environment for downtown?
So with that, I just want to thank you for taking the time this evening. Again, please take the survey, pass it out to your friends, drop it on Facebook. The more the better. Anybody can take the survey. We're really hoping to get a great response so that we have a good base for moving some of these things forward. But also, again, check out the website as well too. If you have questions or any of the pieces that that Nathan discussed from a baseline analysis, that's a great place to get it. It's also a great place to get the contact for the project, which will go straight to Eric Johnson at the bottom. And so feel free to reach out to any of us about this project. But if you just wanted to drop an email and you wanted to get it straight to the city, there's a direct web link or an email link straight to Eric, and he will get your question answered as best he can. So with that, Owen, thank you for Meredith for posting that. So Meredith just posted the project website again.
Yeah. And just as a housekeeping item, folks, these meetings, these open houses are being recorded so that we can later upload this to the project webpage. So for folks that were not able to attend the open house this evening, they can watch these open house videos on the website.
So with that, again, I just want to thank you very much. Scott, do you want to send us off with sage advice and words of wisdom?
Sure. I do want to thank folks for taking time out of their evening to participate in the process and also provide the input. We really do value your time and your ideas. And I also want to thank the team MIG as well as Eric for making sure this went off pretty flawlessly. We've had to make some changes with COVID doing these open houses virtually, and I think the team's really done a great job. So thank you very much.
Thank you. So with that, hopefully we'll see you in person in June. In the meantime, feel free to reach out if you have any questions and take the survey. And again, thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.